Okay, hello everyone. Today we will talk about one of the market structures, monopoly. So before we talked about perfectly competitive markets, it is at the one end of the spectrum. So remember the assumptions for our definition of perfectly competitive market. We have to have many sellers, they should sell identical products, and there are no barriers to entry. Now, that is something very hard to find, but it helps us to understand other market structures. Today, we will talk about the other end of the spectrum. And again, we have some restrictive assumptions. So let's first talk about how we define monopoly, right? So when we say monopoly, we are talking about a market where there is only one seller. Okay. Okay, we have one seller. And this one seller is selling a product that has no close substitutes. No close substitutes, right? So in perfectly competitive markets, there were many sellers and they were selling exactly the same thing, which means in perfectly competitive markets, products were perfect substitutes. In monopoly, there is no close substitute. For instance, imagine a company that produces electricity, right? And let's say in Ankara there is only one company, which is also the truth, right? That sells electricity to consumers, a single company. Now, you can provide lighting and other things with other sources such as candles, right? Or flashlights or some source of electricity that is not supplied by this company, but all those things are not close substitutes. They are really like we would use them in case of scarcity, in very extreme cases. So we will give some more examples so that you would understand that. Lastly, and this is very important, there are barriers to entry. Actually, let's say strong barriers to entry. Okay. Again, remember in perfectly competitive markets, there were no barriers to entry. And the result of that, if in a perfectly competitive markets, firms are making positive profits, other firms would likely enter, right? And eventually profits would go down. And if firms are making losses, firms will exit. And again, we will come back to zero economic profit. That was the case for perfectly competitive markets. But in a monopoly, because there are strong barriers to entry, this single seller, this single firm, even when it is making a huge economic profit, the other firms, practically, they are not able to enter into this sector, right? So if in a monopoly, a firm is making a positive economic profit, in the long run, nothing would change, right? It will continue to reap these high economic profits because of these barriers to entry. Okay, so these are the three important assumptions we make to define a monopoly. We can find examples of pure cases of monopoly from history or maybe even from our current economy. But again, this is an extreme case. Like we have perfect competition and monopoly. Understanding these two we can discuss the other types of intermediate market structure, right? But before doing that, okay, we will talk about what are these barriers to entry in real life. What are the barriers to entry that result in a monopoly? But before that, the implications. So remember, in perfectly competitive market, because of the assumptions we made, we said firms were price takers. In monopoly, it is the opposite, right? There is a single firm which is producing a product with no close substitutes, which means this firm has market power, okay? So the monopoly firm, the single monopoly firm, is a price maker, okay? Because it has market power. Okay, and is there anything else? As I said before, in the long run, it might continue making a positive economic profit, unlike firms in perfectly competitive markets. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this. It has market power. This firm has market power. What does it mean? Now, again, remember, in perfectly competitive market, okay, perfectly competitive market is really helpful for us to understand others. So this is market demand and this is market supply in a perfectly competitive market. And this is the equilibrium price that is the outcome of spontaneous interaction of demand and supply. And this price, right, in a perfectly competitive market, the firm has to accept this price as it is. It cannot divert from this price because in a perfectly competitive market, if as a firm I say I will sell this product at a higher price than the market price, I will lose all my customers, right? So we said, if you don't remember it, you can go to the previous videos, right? But we said a single firm in a perfectly competitive market is faced with a perfectly elastic demand curve, right? So that is what we mean by price taker. It has no ability to affect this price, right? So the decision firm is making in a perfectly competitive market is this. What is the profit maximizing quantity? What is the profit maximizing quantity given this market price, right? Now here is the thing. Let's go to the monopoly. Monopoly, like there is no perfectly elastic demand because this firm is the only one producing this product, right? Now does this mean a monopoly firm can choose whatever price it wants? Yes, but it won't make sense. It cannot say, like for instance, this guy producing electricity, I will charge like 500 TL per kilowatt. Like it cannot make a decision like that. It doesn't make sense. So being a monopoly, yes, it gives you market power. And you have to make a decision about the price you are choosing, right? But it doesn't mean, okay, it doesn't mean monopoly is faced with a perfectly inelastic demand. Sometimes, so this is a common mistake people make. Now, when we give this definition, they say, okay, this is the only firm producing electricity. That means people have to accept whatever price this firm is labeling. That is wrong, okay? So, monopoly does not imply perfectly inelastic demand. Why not? Think about the electricity example. Okay. I mean, when the price of electricity goes up, in modern world, I am still inclined to purchase electricity because I need it, right? So I will still buy a certain quantity of electricity, but there are certain things. I might, for instance, reduce my consumption of electricity because of the price increase, right? I might find some methods, like I might use some of the machines, electrical equipment in my home like I might reduce my consumption, right? I might economize on it. I might even, if it is too expensive, I might even consider using those far substitutes, right? Okay, electricity has no close substitutes, but if it is too expensive, I might really switch to other sources of light or energy which I can use. So this is a no, right? What price making or having market power means is this. This market demand curve is also the demand curve faced by the firm. Okay? The demand curve faced by the firm. So, like if you think about our previous example of tomatoes of a perfectly competitive market, right? We have a tomato market which is perfectly competitive, and let's say we have 1,000 producers in this market. If these 1,000 producers, right, come together and they say, we are now acting as a single company. It is very difficult to do, so that is why we don't see examples of monopolies in some sectors, like tomatoes or agricultural producers. But just imagine this, right? So these 1,000 tomato producers come together, establish a company. Then that single company, right? The management is a single body, single organization. That company will be faced by this demand for tomatoes because they are now a single company. So the demand curve faced by this single firm is the same as the demand curve that we represent in the market, right? So when we are talking about a monopoly, this is the demand curve faced by the firm. And when we will see, when maximizing profit, this firm can choose a quantity that maximizes profit, yes, but also it has the corresponding to that quantity, it will choose profit maximizing price, right? So the decision is about both profit maximizing quantity and price. But apart from that, remember, in monopolies, in monopolistic market structure, there is no competition to the firm. So both in perfectly competitive market and in monopoly, the firms, or the firm in this case, doesn't have to care about what other firms are doing. You don't have to care about that. So there is no strategic decision. Okay, now what are the barriers to entry that we usually see in real life that causes monopolies to emerge? Right, number one, there can be barriers to entry that are government imposed or legal. Okay, government imposed or legal barriers to government imposed and legal barriers to entry. For instance, patents. Okay, let me just write patents, copyrights, public franchise, where the government gives you the right to operate a business, right? So, like, think about a patent. What does a patent say? When you make an invention, right? Let's say you find this new machine, and because it has some value to the society, that invention and that innovation, and you spend time to create this new idea, right? There is a new idea or a new process. And because the societies created legal structures that want to reward those inventions, in all societies today we have patent laws. So once you invent something, you go, and if you can prove that that's an invention, you can get the patent for that invention, which gives you the right in most countries right now to sell, to commercially benefit from invention for a certain period of time alone. Like, for instance, if you have a patent, you can sell this thing for 20 years. It can be sold only by you, okay? So for 20 years, you are the sole seller. Now, the logic of this, because the society wants you to benefit, to profit from that invention for a long period, because you invested in education or research that resulted in this invention, right? But once you have a patent, you are the sole seller of that product for a certain period of time, right? And it means you are a monopoly. If you have a copyright, for instance, for a musical or artistic production, again, for a certain, this is a creative production, again, we would like to reward it, and you will be the sole seller of that product for a certain period of time. If you have a public franchise, like if there is something in the society, like I'm thinking about examples of public franchise. Usually in public utilities like electricity or water services, or sometimes transportation, right? The government either produces those things themselves, right? So state becomes the economic actor that has the monopoly in production and sale of this commodity, or it gives to a single company this right to sell a commodity, right? In Turkey and in many countries today, in public utilities, for instance, electricity in Ankara is produced by a single company, right? And the reason, for this, there are various reasons, but in return, the government, when giving this monopoly, could ask certain conditions to be met as well to protect the consumers. Because once you are a monopoly, as we will see, you have market power, right? And sometimes this market power, we will see again, works in disfavor of consumers. So in most government created monopolies, government also introduces some regulations so that this market power will not harm the consumers. But sometimes they don't, right? Like, we have a lot of historical examples for monopolies. Like, if you think about large companies, East Indian Trade Company, that is a monopoly in a certain sector. and it is all aim is to profit a lot from a certain route of trade. And why the government established such a monopoly? If these merchants, or if this firm, like this partnership of merchants, make a lot of profit, the government can benefit from it by taxing them a lot. So anyway, a little bit of history. Now, second reason of monopoly is, now for historical reasons, for reasons that are related to political economy, sometimes in a sector, a key resource is owned or controlled by a single company. So, ownership and control of a key resource. So let's say we are talking about a diamond sector, right? Diamond market. Now, naturally, because of the geography and because of how different countries occupy different regions in Africa, today most of the land which contains diamond is owned by a single company, right? So if there is a single company that owns the resource, again, that company has the ability to be the single seller in that sector, right? So De Beers, the famous company of diamonds, like it has access to diamonds. And if it is making a lot of profit, other firms see this, they want to enter into this business, but because they don't have the property rights, because they don't have any land that has diamond, they cannot enter into this business, even though there are no legal barriers to entry, right? So there are no legal barriers that says you cannot sell diamonds. But you have to have access to the land that has diamonds, which you don't. So this results in a monopolistic situation. Now, third, this is an interesting issue that you should know, because this has become very important today. Important network externalities. Important network externalities. What is this? So, okay, a network externality is a situation where a commodity, a product, becomes more useful when more people use it. Okay? Let me repeat. So something, okay, a product becomes more useful to me because other people, more people use it. So in today, especially with modern technologies of communication, there are many sectors where there are huge network externalities. So for instance, think about this. When I'm purchasing a mobile phone services from a company, right? Vodafone, Turkcell, or Telsim, I think, which doesn't exist now. So anyway, I'm thinking about getting a service from an operator, like mobile operator. I think about many things, right? The speed of internet, maybe the price of that service, and usually I also think about this. How popular is this service, at least among my friends? Because if most of my friends are using it, it would be cheaper for me, or there might be other conveniences for me when I'm using that service, right? So if more people are using a certain company around myself, I would be more inclined to use it as well. What other examples can we think about? The perfect example is Facebook, right? Like, you are thinking about whether to, like, there are actually other companies and other websites that look like Facebook. But the reason you are using Facebook is because your friends are on it, right? So once there are more people using a social media platform, that platform itself becomes more useful. And as a newcomer consumer, I would be more inclined to use that service. Okay? So this concept is known as network externality. How does it relate to monopoly? Now, if you are the first comer in a sector with high network externalities, first comer meaning as a firm, if you are the first one to create this, like if you are Mark Zuckerberg, right? If you are this person who created this platform and which became popular among a certain group of people, right? I don't know, like 1,000, 10,000. Now, other people see Facebook, right? And they say, wow, this guy is making a lot of money, so I can actually start a business like this and I can profit from this, right? But here is the problem. Even if you know you can produce something technically superior to Facebook, people are already on Facebook, right? So when someone who is considering entering into this business of connecting with your friends online, right? They would look at Facebook, which has many more people, and probably his or her friends, right? And the other company still has only a few people. So even though this other company might be actually producing something nicer, maybe more consumer friendly, the fact that Facebook has already a certain number of consumers makes Facebook more appealing, right? So in a sector with high network externalities, there is a strong first-comer advantage. We call it a first-comer advantage, meaning you would be likely to pull more people, more and more people, and this usually goes together with high switching costs. So let's say there are 3 companies now, 3 firms that produce something similar to Facebook, and I'm angry with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg because of all those news about selling data on Facebook, right? So I might be inclined to switch to one of those alternatives. But here's the thing, switching to someone else, to another platform, is too costly for me because I have all those friends on Facebook. I might need to actually persuade them to switch with me, which is difficult, right? So there are high switching costs. You see how network externalities can be really good for the firm. It is not necessarily great for the consumers, and overall, if you think there might be better improvements in a sector, but they don't happen because there is this advantage. Okay, lastly, so these are 3 reasons of barriers to entry, and our last barrier to entry, very large economies of scale. Very large economies of scale. I briefly talked about it before. So remember how economies of scale look like. Now let's say this is our long run average cost curve. This is our, remember, minimum efficient scale. Okay? So this is a sector where there are huge economies of scale, such as a sector where we have huge setup costs, indivisible setup costs, such as the cable business, right? Okay. So in such a sector, again, the company that first enters and makes this investment, because of the technology and because of these huge economies of scale, let's say there is this company, okay, entered, the first comer in this sector, and produces this amount, okay, it has certain consumers at this cost. This is the cost, not price, not necessarily price, but this is the cost, average cost of producing these services to this company. Now, let's say this company is making a lot of profit, and other firms see and they decide to enter. Now, here is the problem. Whenever you enter a sector, there is already a huge market share captured by this firm, so you need to start small. Like if you are this new company producing this little amount, the average cost would be really high, right? So what you would like to do as this company, you wanna offer a lower price maybe to the consumers to compete with this first company. But you cannot reduce your price much because your average cost is really high, right? So having high costs in entrance works like a barrier to entry for the newcomers. Okay? So again, in very large economies of scale, we have a strong first-comer advantage. For different reasons than network externality. Here we have a first-comer advantage because if you are the first one, you can expand first and you can reduce your average costs first. So you can produce at a lower cost than a firm that comes after you, right? If you can produce at a lower cost, once these firms enter, you can easily reduce your price to push them back, push them out of the market, right? So, and if this quantity, minimum efficient scale, is close to the market demand for this sector, okay, it might be possible. It might be possible for this company to reach minimum efficient scale, and then at that quantity, the market is saturated. Like all the consumers who are willing to pay this cost to the company, they are purchasing it, right? So we are actually, the market size is similar to the minimum efficient quantity, minimum efficient scale. In that case, we call this high economies of scale a natural monopoly. Now, in natural monopolies as well, so natural monopoly arises from a natural reason. A reason that is not related to a legal barrier. Okay, there is no legal barrier. There is no ownership related barrier. So it arises out of a natural reason. Network externalities are also natural reasons for a monopoly. But even though the reasons are natural, these firms have market power. And this market power might work against the advantage of consumer. So even in those cases of natural monopolies, the governments might like to interfere, not to demonopolize necessarily, it is difficult, but to make some regulations. For instance, the government can be okay with this natural monopoly because really, think about this, in a case like this, if the government forces you, I don't like this monopoly, you should divide this company into two, right? Because we don't want monopolies now. So you divide the company into two separate companies, right? But then this doesn't make sense because if these companies are divided and producing less than they be right now, their average cost is higher. So you don't actually want to get rid of monopoly in such a case. Monopoly is fine, but the government might put some price regulations here so that the company will not use its market power to reduce consumer surplus, right? So we won't show it on a graph, but basically this company has a power to put a price that is higher than average total cost. The government would say no, like you should put a price that is acceptable for the consumer from a social welfare perspective. So these are all the reasons we know that result in strong barriers to entry and monopolies. Now we will have a quick numerical example and then we will stop. Okay. So we said firms in a monopolistic market structure are faced with a downward sloping demand curve, which is the demand curve in the market, the aggregate demand curve in the sector, right? So I'm giving you, let's say, a downward sloping demand curve here. Okay, so what do you see here? I'm giving you the demand curve. So these are quantity demanded at each price in this sector. If price is 18, there is only one demanded. If price is lower, quantity demanded increases. So price going down here and quantity demanded is going up. Now, if I ask you as a side question, can you write the equation, which is a linear equation, for these numbers that represent the relationship between quantity demanded and price? Yes, you should be able to write the equation because you know at least 2 points that are valid, right? I will not show you how you find it now. You play with it, but later we will work on it. We will work on using the equation themselves to show profit maximization of a monopoly firm. So the question I am leaving for the discussion part, what is the equation that represents this relationship? Okay, now this is the demand curve, okay? And then we have cost curves, okay? Monopoly is like any firm in a perfectly competitive market. So remember, they have a marginal cost curve, they have average variable cost curve, they have average total cost curve. So we talked a lot about this. For the monopoly, we have the similarly shaped cost curves. So I'm giving you the cost functions in the numerical form again. I'm giving you total cost. Okay, this is the total cost. Total cost in the short run, we are still talking about short run. Total cost in the short run has two components. It is the sum of total fixed cost and total variable cost. I will give you those as well. Total fixed cost, total variable cost. Total fixed cost is the cost of fixed input, so it's a fixed number. Okay, this is the total variable cost. Now, from all this information, I can find marginal cost, right? Now, usually marginal cost is an increasing function, but in this example, just to make things simple as a starter, if you look at the numbers, the change in total variable cost as we change quantity, that is the definition of marginal cost, right? Or the same, change in total cost divided by change in quantity. Now, in this example I gave to you, marginal cost turns out to be constant. You might think this. Why? Stop. Why marginal cost is constant? Just because, to start with a simple numerical example, there is no other reason. So this marginal cost curve doesn't look like our usual marginal cost curve. It looks more like this, like a straight curve. But just bear with me, the logic is the same. So the question is this: what is this is a monopoly, okay? This firm is faced with this demand curve. Only thing you need to find profit maximizing quantity and price is the demand curve faced by the firm and the cost curves. What is the profit maximizing quantity and price? So once more, remember the definition of profit. Total revenue minus total cost. We are trying to maximize that. So I want to find, okay, I will leave this column here for now. I want to find total revenue, right? What is total revenue for this firm when it produces only one quantity? 1 times 18. If this firm produces 2, what is total revenue? 2 times 16. Now, I'm just using this. Total revenue is quantity times price. Quantity sold times price. Quantity sold times price, right? So I already know them. As quantities increase, price goes down. As quantities increase, price goes down. So by multiplying them, 3 times 14 is 42. 4 times 12 is 48. 5 times 10 is 50. 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, these are total revenues. Now, I just want you to remember, okay, how total revenue would look like in a perfectly competitive market. In a perfectly competitive market, this price was constant because firms were price takers. So we were multiplying rising quantities with a constant number. So if you remember, total revenue in a perfectly competitive market looked like this. But in a monopoly, this is the biggest difference. In a monopoly, then price can be changed, right? When price is decreased, quantity is increasing. Because of this relationship, because in a monopoly, firms are not faced with perfectly elastic demand. They are faced with downward sloping demand curve. This total revenue curve for a firm in a monopoly doesn't look like this, right? So if you draw this, it would look something like this. It first increases, then decreases. Okay? So this is our total revenue. Now, just looking at total revenue and total cost here. Okay, look at total revenue and total cost. You can measure profit. You can measure profit and find the profit maximizing quantity. Total revenue is 18, total cost is 14. So the difference is 4. 12, 16. I'm subtracting total cost from total revenue. Okay, now. So when you look at these numbers, right? Profit is maximized in this example. Again, apparently it's a weird numerical example. There are 2 points where profit is the maximum, 16. When quantity is 3 and when quantity is 4, right? So profit is increasing and then decreasing. So usually if we were talking about linear functions, there is probably a quantity between 3 and 4, something like 3.5. Where profit is even higher. But in this example, we have discrete numbers. So we can say only by looking at the numbers, when quantity is 3 or 4, we are maximizing profit. And that would be correct. Now, how can I solve this question? By looking at only marginal revenue and marginal cost. Remember, when we were talking about perfectly competitive markets and the firm's profit-making decision, profit is total revenue minus total cost. This is a definition. This is true for a firm in a perfectly competitive market and for a firm in a monopoly. When quantity increases, total revenue increases. But when quantity increases, total cost also increases. So I want to make a comparison between how much total revenue increases in response to an increase in quantity. This is known as marginal revenue. I want to compare this with how much total cost increases in response to a quantity increase. This is known as marginal cost. So as long as marginal revenue is higher than marginal cost, I want to produce. If marginal cost is higher than marginal revenue, I don't want to produce. So the rule of profit maximization is still true. This rule is true for any firm. This is where we maximize profit. So here I want marginal revenue. Marginal revenue, by definition, change in total revenue in response to change in quantity. If I produce nothing, my total revenue is 0. So when I produce the first quantity, that is my marginal revenue. So my total revenue increased from 0 to 18. Marginal revenue is the first unit is 18. What about the second unit? So these differences here will give me marginal revenue. Okay. This is the number one difference between a firm in a perfectly competitive market and a firm in a monopoly. Marginal revenue is going down as quantity increases, right? In a perfectly competitive market, remember, price was constant because they are price takers. Because of that, marginal revenue was constant. Marginal revenue was a single number, 4 or 5, whatever the price is. In this example, because we have, the firm is faced with a downward sloping demand curve, marginal revenue curve is also downward sloping. So we will do the drawings in the class, in the next session, but I just want you to observe this downward sloping marginal revenue. Now I'm comparing these two. Marginal revenue is more than marginal cost. Do I want to produce the number one product? Yes. This is also true. Yes, I want to produce this because it is increasing my profit. This is increasing my profit. This is increasing my profit. Here, I stop here, right? After this, I don't want to produce this. I don't want to produce this because if I'm producing this unit, the marginal cost of this unit is more than marginal revenue. My profit would decline by this difference. Look at the difference. Marginal cost is 4 points higher than marginal revenue. So profit will be declining, which we see here. Profit is declining by 4. So this is the point where I stop. After this, marginal revenue becomes lower than marginal cost. The rule is the same, but just the shape of marginal revenue is different. And this has a lot of implications about consumer surplus, producer surplus, allocative efficiency, which we will show on a graph in class in the next hour.